Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show appearing here on Facebook Live. And joining me today is my colleague, Jackson Mvunganyi, the host of VOA's Upfront. Jackson, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
To Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you again.
Thank you.
So what have you? Yeah, a warm welcome to you all, our Facebook followers watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka. Unfortunately, Shaka is out today, but my colleague Jackson is sitting in for Shaka, so he'll be taking your questions in a minute. But let's start in New York. The 73rd General Assembly, UN General Assembly is taking place.
Right.
We've had some speakers speak this far. For example, the President of the United States just finished his remarks maybe an hour ago. Your assessment so far?
Obviously, when the General Assembly is taking place in New York, all eyes turned to the UN and some of the speeches, including the speech by the U.S. President, whoever it is at the time, and this is the second time Donald Trump was addressing the General Assembly. And from his speech, you could see that we've seen this retreat by the U.S., by this administration, to retreat from the global affairs of the world. He talked about how countries have the right to live, to lead their own lives, their own political lives. We won't be interfering in your day-to-day affairs. You do what you want. And that we are going to give foreign aid to only our friends, those who like us, who have our best interest at heart. Those are the words of President Donald Trump. Again, to echo, I guess, the sentiments in his first address last year to the UN General Assembly, this general retreat from global affairs. The U.S. does not want to meddle into your internal politics. We want to do our thing, you do your thing. So long as you show us respect, we'll also show you respect.
Surprisingly, today he came off sort of in a measured tone. He wasn't as fiery as he was the last time.
He did give some remarks that elicited a laugh from the audience. It sounded like he felt almost like he was speaking at a rally here in the U.S. when he's speaking to his supporters.
Talking about his accomplishments.
Exactly, talking about his accomplishments, how the economy is doing so well. No other administration has achieved this much success in such a short time period like his administration has. And there was laughter in the hall, and he caught himself. He's like, well, I did not expect that kind of reaction, which was quite interesting too.
He can be funny too.
It is. He did. He stayed on script. Very few times where he ad-libbed, but it was straight speech, speaking to his foreign policy objectives. One of the things that he said that I guess resonated with many African leaders was this new policy by the U.S. To not recognize the ICC, and that it's one of the things that caught many human rights watchers off guard. This strong anti-ICC sentiment in this administration, where they say they're not endorsing the ICC and that they will not. I guess they called it, we will not kowtow to, will not be, I don't remember the exact word, but he basically said that we do not recognize the power of the ICC over our people, which is the same argument that has been made for a long time by many of the African leaders who have been either indicted or been allegedly committed, crimes against humanity that the ICC has been investigating.
I guess there is every reason to worry when it comes to, especially how he's been dealing with immigrants from, let's say, the Arab world or the Muslim countries. It's not been fun. He's come under criticism for just dealing with immigration in this country. Later on, immigration that covers some of those countries.
Indeed.
Yeah. Let's talk about the unveiling of the Mandela statue yesterday. This was one of the most significant events at the UN this year. Can you speak to us maybe about the symbolism of this? Why a Mandela statue at the United Nations?
Mandela is such a global icon of peace, of love, of reconciliation, and honestly, there's no one single leader in our generation who is more deserving of a statue at the UN than Mandela. And so this was such a great move. It's one of those moves that you feel that everybody was behind it. Most leaders spoke at it. It's a reminder that we need leaders like Nelson Mandela, and that he inspires young leaders on the continent and around the world to be better and to serve larger purposes in life than their own personal goals. And so I was very happy to see this unveiling of a statue at the UN of Nelson Mandela.
The theme this year is about peace and reconciliation, and maybe going back to what you said about Mandela, one of the reasons they are honoring him this year is because of the things that he stood for.
Absolutely.
That peace that you mentioned, the reconciliation. But to a larger extent, our continent, Africa, is still dealing with a lot of issues,
yes,
especially in regard to peace and security.
Right, conflict.
A lot of countries have conflict. Some countries have conflict. People don't have peace. They can't sleep. Your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. You know, again, there's no one more deserving of this recognition. No one single person who represents the ambitions and aspiration of a peaceful Africa that Nelson Mandela did, and that we keep him in our minds and thoughts all the time to inspire us is such a great honor to us who've watched him in our generation, in our lifetime, but also to everybody who's coming out behind us. And as our countries around the continent grapple with issues of democracy, with human rights, reconciliation, that they can look up to him as a person that they can that inspires them.
Let's stay in South Africa. Let's talk about the couple reforms are coming out of South Africa. Most significant, maybe the land reform. There's been a lot of talk about the land reform. If you remember, Zimbabwe did the same thing in 2000, and it ended up the wrong way. The implementers of that land reform just did everything possible to make sure the thing doesn't work. What South Africa is going through, could it be something that they have to avoid, or it's something that along the way might cause problems?
Right. One of the most contentious issues in South Africa right now is land reform. I think President Cyril Ramaphosa just appointed a commission of about 10 people, I believe, to study this issue. The thing is that in South Africa, over 70% of the land is owned by just 10% of the population. There's a lot of inequality, there's a lot of poverty, most of which is historical. And to solve these issues is not easy. There's going to be a lot of people fighting against any kind of reforms. The powers that be, the people that have vested interests, mostly those who are the landowners. And the challenges on, the government of Cyril Ramaphosa to handle these very sensitively, again, to learn from the situation in Zimbabwe under Mugabe almost 2 decades ago. That experiment did not go right. Hopefully, this time around, they will have learned something from that, and that Ramaphosa and this commission that he has set up will come up with solutions to this land reform issue, land expropriation, as some have called it, that does not lead to violence or people fighting or, not happy. Obviously, not everybody will be happy, but at least hopefully there will be a middle ground where people feel like that there's been a pragmatic approach to this situation.
Speaking of a pragmatic approach, land distribution was a key component during the apartheid era. They talked about it, they made promises, but those promises were never kept. Today, we are talking about the same issue. Land is still predominantly owned by a lot of white people.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of inequality in South Africa. And inequality is a legacy of apartheid and colonialism in that country, something that has been afflicting that country for over 300 years, and not something that is not an issue that you're going to resolve in 1 year or 2 years or 3 or 4 years. So I think they've been making steps toward it. This is just part of that process, and hopefully they will find again that solution that where everybody is happy that we are doing what is in the best interest of the majority of the country, or everybody in the country.
How about those people who say that, for example, just trying to address the land issue is not going to solve the economic challenges that are faced by the country?
Absolutely. There are so many issues. I mean, land is a very big resource in any country. Being able to solve that is part of an equation. It's not the only factor, but I think being able to find a solution to the land issue, in essence, solves some of those other underlying issues of inequality.
Still in South Africa, let's talk about another thing. Most recently, there have been discussions on how to figure out how maybe to ease getting visas into South Africa, largely because of the tourism potential that that has. Can you speak to that?
So South Africa makes a lot of money from tourism, but it's also one of the countries that is most inaccessible to Africans. I know, for example, Rwandans currently complain that they don't get visas to South Africa easily. I mean, I'm sure there's few who do, but
there are reasons why Rwandans don't get visas.
But many people around the continent complain that they are locked out of South Africa because it has very strict visa regulations. The fact that South Africa is going to join other African countries potentially, because they're still in negotiations. They have, I guess, they're saying that a couple of countries right now are going to be allowed to be visa-free. They're still negotiating on which countries in the African continent will be visa-free. Remember, there was, I think it was last year, I think it was last year when many countries on the continent, including Rwanda, Ghana, and others, opened their borders to Africans, where you can, easily travel without a visa. South Africa joining this bandwagon, opening their borders to people, I think is a good thing. It's never a bad thing to let people come and visit. Part of the reason why there's a lot of xenophobia in South Africa is that this is somebody who told me this in South Africa when I was there last year, is that the country has been so closed off to Africans, to visitations by other Africans, and there's a lot of visitors that come from outside of Africa, I mean, to come and visit for tourism purposes in South Africa or for work, but they don't see a lot of Africans unless they're coming in as migrant workers or migrants, refugees or asylees. And so I think it's a commendable effort on South Africa's part to be looking into resolving, I guess, this issue of the visa.
How about people who make the argument?
Sorry, relaxing visa regulations, yes.
How about the people who make the argument of saying that compared to most countries, South Africa is actually better? I remember a time when my first passport as a young kid, had a big red issue there that said you can travel to all countries except South Africa. And now we are talking about them easing visas, access to people.
I'm guessing that you got that passport in the 80s?
Absolutely.
Right, that was at the time when South Africa was under heavy travel restriction by most African countries because it was an apartheid government, and they had most African governments were as a way to protest the apartheid regime had stopped, refused their citizens to go visit South Africa. So I guess that's how you got your passport, when most countries had those restrictions.
Right, right, yeah.
So where's that passport? You still have it?
I still have it. I still have it. It's amazing how things have changed. A lot of people go to South Africa for greener pastures.
Right.
The people that I know in South Africa are doing very well compared to other countries they have come from.
But you cannot overlook the fact that also South Africa has been very restrictive to visitations by other Africans. Also, we cannot overlook the fact that there's, you know, the issue of xenophobia that keeps rearing its ugly head time to time in South Africa, where South Africans brutalize fellow Africans who were there with them during the days of apartheid, and such a shame.
You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday. Shaka Sally is off, and Jackson Mvunganyi, the host of Upfront, is filling in for Shaka. So we'll be taking your comments shortly. Before we go to the comments, let's go back to maybe another issue that we wanted to talk about. Corruption.
Yes.
Corruption seems to be an epidemic that doesn't have a cure, especially you keep hearing of these scandals. Lately, you've heard of a scandal where almost nearly $100 million just disappeared.
In Liberia.
In transit.
Right. Liberia lost almost 5% of its GDP. They ordered banknotes to be printed, I believe, in Sweden or some other country. And the money comes in, but it got lost somewhere in the you know, from where it was printed to the central bank. Somewhere the money is missing, and they've been looking. The investigations are ongoing. The son of the former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was implicated in the scandal. The government of George Weah is currently under pressure because I think he ran on the mantle, on the platform of fighting corruption in the country. This is such a big story on the continent right now, actually around the world. I mean, how do you explain $100 million disappearing in a cargo the size of a small room, just disappearing off of a port?
I mean, I track my pennies wherever they fall. I track my dollars, and you're talking about $100 million.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Right. And the other issue. So we're still waiting to see what happens with that story and the investigation. And today, another story that broke that I found very interesting was that the son of the former president of Angola, José dos Santos, the son who was in charge of the sovereign fund, has been arrested again for corruption, apparently in regards or related to the handling of the sovereign fund. Remember when the current president of Angola took over from dos Santos, they said he was a hand-picked person who was going to tread carefully in handling the businesses of the former Fast family. It's not looking that way. It looks like this man is actually coming in strong, and this was a very interesting story to read today, that the son of the family that had been in power for over 30 years is currently being investigated for corruption.
Well, you could say that the chickens are coming home to roast because those guys were used to really using the national the national bank as their personal ATM.
Right.
You know, the daughter is one of the richest people in Africa.
Absolutely. She's I think the richest woman in Africa.
Yeah.
No? Yes.
Arguably the richest woman in Africa.
So the sister to the gentleman who has been arrested.
Right.
Yes.
So
and that comes at the heels.
How did she get those riches?
It comes at the heels of the story that we talked about last week. The son of Teodoro Obiang, who is currently the vice president of Equatorial Guinea, being arrested in Brazil with what, $16 million cash and watches, and so.
You know, when I was reading earlier, there's something that struck a chord with me, talking about Liberia, corruption. It's so endemic that there is actually no law. Corruption in Liberia is not punishable by law.
Oh, I did not know that.
It's not a crime.
I did not know that.
So anybody can get away with whatever they want to do.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
I found that to be interesting, considering...
Well, hopefully that the approach of the new president who is in the U.S. right now, attending his first UN General Assembly, President George Weah. I still find that very interesting to say President George Weah, knowing that this guy was one of the best footballers the continent has ever had. We're still waiting to see what he will do in terms of fighting corruption in his country.
Will that football translate into
how he handled himself on the court, on the pitch, on the football pitch?
So, okay, let's go to some comments here. Yeah. Let's start in Uganda. Let's start with Frank Nwamanya. What are the implications of a peaceful DRC for the whole of Africa?
Right. So the DRC is one of the world's wealthiest countries, potentially, in terms of resources. I read somewhere that the DRC has over $24 trillion in untapped resources. But the country, unfortunately, has been at war. There's been a lot of conflict in that country for the last 3 decades. You know, post-independence, DRC, or former Zaire, has not known a day of peace. There is fighting in Eastern Congo, Central Congo. Parts of the country are always in some sort of conflict, you know. A peaceful DRC would mean that people, Congolese, would start enjoying the resources, the wealth of their country. A peaceful DRC will also mean that Western powers, including China, will not just come in and take the resources without fully being accountable to where they, you know, where they're taking the resources and how they're taking those resources. A peaceful DRC also will mean that other Africans will benefit from the wealth and resources of the DRC.
Wait a minute, Jackson. People that don't just show up at your borders and start taking resources. These are people who go in those countries with the right paperwork to do business.
Absolutely.
And they're in cahoots with the government of the day.
Absolutely. Then the issue is with the leadership of the country, the successive leadership in the country over the years, from the days of Mobutu to the days of Kabila. The plan that has been happening in the DRC has been they've been in cahoots with the leadership and other either Western corporations or Western governments, or whichever figures or people that have been benefiting from the resources of the DRC, but not the people of the DRC.
Jackson, there's a comment from Rwanda here. Since you're from Rwanda, Musinguzi Kato Evan wants to know why the international community has turned a deaf ear to the detention of Rwandan politician Diane Rigala.
I don't think they have turned a deaf ear. I feel that people have spoken up. There's been widespread condemnation. This has been part of a conversation in every circle. It's been in the media. The Rigara issue is something that is still being litigated in the courts of law in Rwanda, adjudicated, and how that turns out, we don't know yet. But I don't think that there's been silence. You know, people are speaking out, whether it's people in civil society, whether it's in the international community, whether it's international institutions or international governments. I feel like this is an issue that has been in the news and continues to be in the news as long as that case is ongoing.
What's the progress on Victor Ingabire, who was just
we talked about Victoria last week. I don't know. I think she's a citizen like everybody else. She was she was released with
not under house arrest.
Others. I don't know if she's under. She can't be under house arrest because she was released.
You know for sure that Rwanda is a police state. They are policing.
I don't know about that. She's a free citizen like everybody else. I'm sure she's conducting business. And I think she was actually at the. In court recently too, when Diane Rigara was there too. So I feel like she's able to conduct her business like every other citizen. Now, how free she is, maybe that's somebody you can call and talk to her and say, how about on the show, Paul?
Let's cross over to South Sudan. South Sudan is another basket case. We've had peace talks day in, day out. Everybody
as somebody likes to call them peace jokes.
Yes. As we speak today, today, I think yesterday or today, Riek Machar said he's not going to Juba.
Right, because there's no assurance of security for him.
So what peace talks are we talking about?
I don't know.
What peace jokes are we talking about?
I don't know, man. I feel like there's still a lot to be done in I guess, the trust between those two individual players in this conflict, which is Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. I feel like they don't have trust of each other. If the former vice president and the man who you just signed a peace deal with says he's not able to visit the capital city to work out whatever remaining kinks are in the peace treaty or peace talks, it means to me that they didn't really believe in the peace agreement that they signed. So I don't know what happens. Maybe they need to bring in Museveni again. Museveni seems to be the power player, the power broker in that region
but the guy has been at it for a very long time, and he has not managed to bring these people together. They say partly because he's an interested party in that conflict. We
got to give it up to Abiy Ahmed and, interestingly enough, the man in Khartoum who was able to get them on the table to actually eventually sign a peace agreement. The people of South Sudan are tired of fighting, of war, of dying unnecessarily. Okay, it's time for these two characters, these two individuals, to get their act together and understand that they're working for the country and not for their individual interests.
Let's go to another Facebook comment here. Let's go to Mona Amina. When the leadership is poor, misuse of natural resources by so-called leaders is inevitable. All sorts of atrocities after can't be talked about for fear of death. What do you make of
accountability? Basically, what we talked about last time, which is you know, basically the reason we see a lot of endemic corruption on the continent. You know, when leaders are not accountable to their people and how they use their resources, which is something we talked about last week. You start asking yourself or asking the leadership to be accountable to you and understand that the wealth of the nation is as much yours as it is for the next person, and that you should find a way to share the wealth, this wealth, amongst yourselves for the benefit of the population in general. The reason why we see that there is a backlash when you speak out is that there's that culture among some of the leaders on the continent where they take this, they take whatever resources are available to them and use them whichever way they want, because they know that you won't speak out. Because you'll be afraid. They will, you know, you go on the street and protest, and they will throw tear gas at you, and then you'll give up.
Okay. But that's no longer the case. There are a lot of young people who are standing up to these leaders and saying, you know what, we won't be counted.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And maybe this is the generation that is going to make the change. Maybe this is the time that we, you know, maybe you are the leaders you've been waiting for. You know what I'm saying?
Very quickly, there is another comment. Doris Agnes. Africans no longer stand in solidarity with each other, the same way it was during the apartheid era. Why has the EU not come out to support the Ugandans for their struggle against Museveni?
But did they say Africans are not standing up for each other, and then they say the EU in the same sentence? You mean the AU? Did they mean to say the AU, the African Union?
Probably.
Because
maybe,
that would be another issue. Because you know, since when did the African Union act to to speak out on behalf of the people of the continent? I know that that is not a controversial statement to make by any measure. Okay.
well, Jackson, for those who are the fans of Straight Talk, on Straight Talk tomorrow we'll be talking about the UNGA Assembly, or UNGA Assembly, the 73rd Assembly, and Shaka Sali will be off, but Vincent Makori will be sitting in for him. On that note, thank you so much for being with us today. Jackson Mbonganyi, the host of Upfront, was filling in for Shaka, and I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week. Until then, so long from Washington.
This was fun.
And